Someday, this will be called the Trump era. This is more dynamic, intense, and exciting than probably any period of time I've lived through. I thought nothing could compare to leaving the Soviet Union for the open world, for freedom, and especially among Jews in Israel. But what's happening now seems to outweigh everything that has happened before in my life. Ladies and gentlemen, it seemed that America was already slipping into the very cesspool that many of us managed to escape from. It seemed like the end, and well, basically the only hope was that maybe it would be enough for our lifetime. And as for the children and grandchildren, if they like something, let them live with it. If they don't like something, well, basically, after me, the deluge. What surprised me was that left-wing media started saying that Trump, like an ancient Roman Caesar, by the way, cable news network introduced this term, is saving civilization from cultural Marxism. I didn't come up with that either, they did. And in more right-wing publications and on the internet, he's more often called something like St. George, who fights the socialist dragon or the dragon of socialism, whichever you prefer. Today we're going to talk about the already noticeable underground tremors. Let's start with Russia, about the tectonic shifts in the Kremlin, about the two possible paths of development in the Novo-Russian Empire. We'll talk about the striking findings of public opinion polls in the United States about the onset, as they write, of a new conservative century in Europe and the world, and about the collapse of globalism. It's not here yet, but the cracks are already visible. About the mass exodus of more than 1 million Democrats from their party. But probably the main news is that the United States has stopped supplying weapons to Ukraine. Well, and 60 days of truce in Gaza. These are the two main things. Let's talk about the extraordinary event, the halt of arms supplies to Ukraine. But let's probably start with the situation in Russia. They are somewhat related to each other, or rather it coincided with various reports that our government is receiving. Things are getting worse in Russia. What does worse mean? By the way, this is evident in the economy, in the psychological state of society, and in export revenues. Even the extraction of mineral resources has decreased. Everything is falling apart. Although for now, the authorities can still keep this under wraps, sort of, so to speak, under this web of lies. The intelligence agencies already know, but the people haven't felt it yet.
Russia's economy is in such a difficult situation that Putin, a man who never admits defeat, had to go on state television and openly admit that his economy is in deep crisis.
Now, regarding the expenses themselves, is 6.3% a lot or a little?
6.3% of Russia's gross domestic product for defense needs is 13.5 trillion rubles.
That means a black hole called the war in Ukraine is swallowing up 172 billion United States dollars a year.
For a long time, the Russian government reported growth statistics, but the reality on the ground tells a different story. Oil revenues have fallen by more than 1 trillion rubles. Inflation has raised food prices by 90%, and the labor shortage is paralyzing entire industries.
Food has become 90% more expensive, gentlemen. That's twice as expensive. It's twice as expensive to go grocery shopping. This is no joke for the residents of Orel, Vorkuta, and many other less fortunate places.
This isn't just a small problem. What we're witnessing is the economic collapse of a country in real time, a country that once seemed unstoppable. In this video, we'll expose Russian economic deception, the war's concealed expenses, and the demise of its oil empire. Let's dive into it. Headlines from the Kremlin might tell you that Russia's economy grew by 4.3% in 2024, which at first glance sounds impressive. The government likes to point to this figure, claiming that it surpassed countries like the United States or the United Kingdom. They will claim that this is proof of the effectiveness of their policies, that Russia stands firm despite all the difficulties. But all of this is fake statistics, and the growth is not what it seems. It doesn't come from new factories, thriving businesses, or a successful middle class. It's mainly about one thing: military spending. The Kremlin is investing heavily in tanks, missiles, and soldiers' salaries as if there's no future.
Russia produces things that go to the front and never come back, things that immediately disappear in war, things that don't bring prosperity to the people. There are numbers, but there's no prosperity.
Defense spending even jumped by 70%. Defense spending even increased by 70% last year, eating up a third of the national budget. This isn't the kind of growth that creates a healthy economy. It's like putting all your money into one stock and hoping it never crashes. When the war slows down or the money runs out, what happens then? Everything starts to wobble, and it's already wobbling. Look at the civilian sectors, at the parts of the economy that support the country on a daily basis. Industries like construction, retail, and manufacturing are barely staying afloat. Retail sales dropped in 2024, which means people are buying less clothing, appliances, and other goods. Construction has also declined, with new housing projects down by 10%. That's because high interest rates make mortgages unaffordable. Factories that produce furniture or packaged goods are operating at lower capacity, some at only 60% of what they could produce. Stores are selling less, construction of new buildings has slowed, and factories have reduced production. Why is the government focused on the military machine instead of helping regular businesses grow?
Biden managed to drag Russia into a war it can't win, but it also can't lose. Then outraged crowds will sweep away the Kremlin's powerless rulers in a bloody revolt. Russia is now like Gaza, like Iran and Yemen, raging hate-filled crowds.
A growth rate of 4.3% is like a shiny apple that's rotten inside. Let's discuss inflation, as that's where it begins. It significantly impacts ordinary people. In March of this year, inflation was around 10%, down from a staggering 12.9% at the end of last year. But it's still too high, so people are paying more for less, and their savings or fixed incomes can't keep up with the increase. To combat the price spiral, the Central Bank of Russia hiked interest rates to a shocking 21%. These are some of the world's highest interest rates currently. High rates act like brakes on the economy. Businesses can't afford to borrow money to expand or even keep operating. Small shops, cafes, and startups suffer the most. Many are closing down because they can't afford loans. Ordinary people can't get loans for cars or homes. The real estate sector is suffering as people can't afford mortgages. New home sales are dropping, leaving developers with unsold properties. And when businesses can't grow or start laying people off, the whole economy feels that pain. The central bank's attempt to solve one problem is creating another. Then comes the labor shortage, which acts like a slow poison for Russia's economy. Currently, the country is short about 2,600,000 workers, which is quite a lot. It's as if an entire city was missing from the workforce. The main reason for this situation is the ongoing war in Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of men were sent to the front lines, with many not returning. Others fled the country to avoid the draft, especially young skilled workers in tech and finance fields. In 2022, around 750,000 people emigrated from the country, and the trend continues.
Russians are fleeing, some to China, some to Georgia, some to Turkey, and some to Europe. Those who are lucky, those who really rushed, even make it to America anywhere, as long as they don't end up in the army. And many of those who are in the army won't return home, or they'll come back disabled.
Sanctions are another massive weight dragging Russia down. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, the West responded with tough sanctions. Bank accounts were frozen, tech imports banned, and oil sales cut. At first, Russia found workarounds such as selling oil to China and India, but now the damage is obvious. Oil revenues, which make up 40% of Russia's economy, dropped by 35% in May 2025 compared to the previous year. Billions of dollars that once funded schools, roads, and the military. The European Union's coal ban and the $60 per barrel oil price cap are depriving the government of funds. Technical sanctions are just as serious. Car factories can't get parts, so production lines are idle, and dealerships that used to have full lots are now empty. The sanctions are slowly suffocating Russia's economy, tightening their grip daily. The country is struggling to overcome mounting difficulties, and the impending collapse is becoming increasingly evident. Let's discuss Russia's increasing debt, which is another indicator of the instability of the situation.
The Russian government is still trying to convince both its own citizens and the outside world that everything is fine. They themselves are doing just fine, but others are not.
Since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, in 2022, the Russian Ministry of Finance is printing debt by issuing federal loan bonds worth $128 billion to keep the government running. That's a huge number, especially considering that $32 billion of it was added just since January 2025. To put this in perspective, the entire Russian economy in 2024 was worth $2.24 trillion, just slightly less than New York's economy at $2.3 trillion. Racking up that much debt in such a short time is like maxing out a credit card to pay for a war that's already draining the bank. Borrowing such a large sum is risky considering the sanctions. It helps cover expenses for now, but what happens when it's time to pay back those loans? Russia is betting on a future it might not be able to afford. At this point, you might think, even with sanctions, Russia still has oil, right? That should be enough to keep the country afloat. But that assumption couldn't be more wrong. Oil has been Russia's economic lifeline for decades, and now that lifeline is quickly wearing out. In 2025, oil and gas still make up about 40% of Russia's gross domestic product and more than a third of the federal budget. But the numbers are collapsing. The price of URALS oil, Russia's main export blend, has dropped to about $56 per barrel this year, which is the lowest level since the start of the pandemic. This is much lower than the $69 per barrel the Kremlin used to balance the budget. The consequences are severe. In the first quarter of 2025, Rosneft's net profit fell by 57%, and oil production reached a 9-year low. Even when Russia tries to move away from Europe and redirect exports to countries like India and China, it is forced to sell at deep discounts. It is frequently sold at least $20 below global benchmarks simply to remain competitive. And it's not just about the prices. Russia's oil infrastructure is under strain, refineries are aging, equipment imports are limited, and these so-called shadow fleets of tankers used to bypass sanctions are shrinking as controls tighten. In May 2025, revenues from seaborne oil fell by 8% compared to the previous month, even though export volumes remained almost unchanged. Russia's current oil gamble mirrors a failed strategy from 2008 when a price collapse shocked the economy. However, the stakes are now even higher. The war in Ukraine has inflated military spending, and the government is losing money. When oil revenues decline, the Kremlin is forced to drain its sovereign fund, which is already shrinking, or cut spending elsewhere.
Oil and gas revenues are not enough. Russia has no other sources of income. Arms sales have stopped after failures in Ukraine and complete defeat and disgrace in Iran. India is leaving Russia's list of clients, and along with them, a number of neighboring countries are leaving as well, having realized that Russian weapons cannot stop American, Israeli, French, or Iranian weapons. The sky was left unprotected despite the tens of billions of dollars that were paid to Russia for air defense systems.
But the crisis isn't just about sanctions because of the war. Russia's economy is overly reliant on oil and gas, a fundamental issue. About 40% of its gross domestic product and 60% of its exports come from energy. It's like putting all your future on one industry, isn't it? When oil prices were high in the 2000s, Russia's economy thrived. New apartments are being built, people are buying cars, and the government is raising salaries. But when prices fell in 2025, the system began collapsing. Another big problem is how Russia's economy is structured. It is heavily controlled by the government, which runs everything from banks to oil companies. This structure hinders private businesses from thriving. Entrepreneurs face endless bureaucracy, corruption, and the constant threat of government interference. Businesses deal with taxes, bribes, and the risk of state takeover. This structure stifles innovation and hinders entrepreneurs who can't thrive while constantly on guard. As a result, Russia's economy lacks the diversity and flexibility needed to adapt to challenges. Compare this to a country like South Korea, where tech giants like Samsung drive innovation and growth. Russia has no equivalent because the system suppresses anyone thinking outside the box. Countries like Norway also depend on oil, but they have diversified their economies with things like shipping or renewable energy. Russia has never done this, and now it's facing the consequences. Speaking of bad structures and government control, Russia is excessively corrupt. Corruption in Russia is like a leak in its economic engine, siphoning off funds that could have been used to repair schools, hospitals, or roads. And it's not just a few bad people, it's a system where bribes and kickbacks are a part of doing business. For example, to open a small shop or get a building permit, owners often have to pay officials unofficially. These bribes can eat up 10% or more of a business's profits, money that could have gone to hiring workers or buying additional equipment. Large companies, especially in the oil and gas sectors, suffer even more. Government officials often demand a cut from major deals, and these costs are passed on to consumers through higher prices. Last year, it placed Russia among the most corrupt countries with a score of 26 out of 100. This was much worse than many of its neighbors. This corruption scares off foreign investors who don't want to deal with shady deals or sudden takeovers by the government. Back in 2018, she left Russia after years of struggling with corrupt officials. And stories like this are not uncommon. Even Russian companies face difficulties, as small firms spend up to 20% of their time on inspections and bureaucratic procedures. This is often just a pretext for taking bribes. Meanwhile, the siphon money ends up in the hands of a few elites who buy mansions abroad or hide the money in offshore accounts. In 2024, a leak revealed that $15 billion in suspicious funds are leaving Russia. That's enough to fund healthcare for millions of people. This greed widens the gap between the rich and the poor, leaving ordinary Russians to deal with crumbling infrastructure and rising prices. It's a vicious cycle that keeps the economy from developing, because those who could fix everything benefit from keeping things the way they are.
In Russia, it's not profitable to build a strong, good road. How can you get money for repairs 2 years in a row if nothing has broken? So you build it so that nothing breaks. And then what? Basically, doing things well and reliably means you won't get a government contract because officials always want their kickbacks. But where can they get them if you build, repair so well and generally do everything by the rules?
The tech sector exemplifies Russia's poorly structured economy. Previously, Russia had a developing technology industry with companies like Yandex and Mail.ru that competed on the world stage. But since 2022, this sector has been undermined. Sanctions have cut off access to Western software, cloud services, and equipment such as microchips. This hinders the creation and maintenance of technological products. Simultaneously, thousands of skilled programmers and engineers have emigrated. Even before 2022, Russia was losing talent. 100,000 information technology workers left in 2022, moving to countries like Estonia or Armenia. The technical workforce has shrunk by 20%, leaving companies struggling to fill positions. These are people who could have created the next big app or startup, but now they're working elsewhere, in places like Israel. Russia's brain drain is rapidly depleting its future and becoming a major national problem.
At first, it was Jewish families who left, taking with them future scientists, future researchers, and future creators. Then those who became disillusioned with everything during the turbulent 90s left. After that, those who never knew the Soviet Union started leaving. But they saw that somewhere out there in Europe, in America, in Asia, in the Middle East, life was better than at home. And then those who didn't want to get caught up in the Ukrainian meat grinders started fleeing.
Russia's economy is suffering from years of misguided choices. And now that bill is coming due, the accumulating problems are impacting both Russian society and beyond its borders. Economic pressure is making life harder for millions of Russians. About 21 million people, roughly 1 in 7, live below the poverty line. The government's focus on the war isn't helping. In 2025, a staggering 41% of the federal budget is allocated to defense and security. That's a huge amount of money, enough to build thousands of schools or hospitals. Military spending is sky high, and it goes beyond just weapons. Rather, the money goes to missiles, military bases, and signing bonuses for new recruits. This war in Ukraine, now in its third year, is draining resources at a time when the economy is already on its knees. At this point, you're probably thinking that Russia should just leave and end the war, right? Well, here's the twist. Russia's economy is now so tied to the war that stopping it could cause even more harm. The war has become a lifeline for some regions. Defense factories in places like Tula produce weapons, providing jobs for 1,200,000 people, 10% of Russia's workforce in 2025. Arms exports, such as missiles to Iran, generated $14 billion last year, a rare positive in the contracting economy. Without the war, these jobs and deals could vanish, spiraling cities into decline. And the Kremlin knows this, so it tries to keep the fighting going, hoping that military spending will hold everything together. It's like a gambler doubling down on a bad hand, hoping for a miracle. Of course, this comes at a price.
And now, when Israel and the United States have bombed the air defense systems supplied by Russia, when Russian planes, missiles, and radars have proven unable to stop air raids, things will go really badly for the Russian military industry. Russia will do everything in its power to fan the flames of war in the Middle East. But they have very few resources and arguments left. That's why the laws against dissent are getting stricter inside the country. That's how it always works.
A government under siege might tighten its control, suppressing dissenters to stay in power. In 2024, Russia enacted laws limiting free speech and jailing protesters. The economic crisis in Russia is shaping the country's future, not just its present. Let's consider the future. Can Russia escape this predicament, or does an even graver crisis await? The most immediate risk is a full recession due to the huge deficit that Russia has. Oil and gas revenues, which used to fill the treasury, have decreased by 35% compared to last year. Tax revenue is lower due to reduced spending by businesses and consumers. If these trends persist, Russia could encounter difficulties by 2026 due to a severe recession. International banks are not dealing with Russia, and domestic loans may have interest rates of 21% or more. Printing money is another option, but that will lead to inflation, which is already at 9.9%. Higher inflation will mean even higher prices for food and utilities, which will hit Russians hard. Cutting spending seems like the most likely step, but with 41% of the budget tied to defense, the government has little room to maneuver. Cutting military spending could weaken the war effort, which is unacceptable for the Kremlin. Therefore, budget cuts are likely to affect social programs or healthcare, which are already stretched to the limit. The recession will expose Russia's economic fragility, shattering the growth illusion and impacting its global standing. A weaker economy means less money for military adventures or foreign aid, which Russia uses to demonstrate its influence in places like Syria or Africa. This could also make Russia more dependent on China, which is already starting to fill the gap left by Western trade. But it's a risky game. China's support comes with certain conditions, such as access to Russian resources or military bases. A recession may trap Russia in a debt cycle, hindering its ability to act independently globally. Another possibility is stagnation, when the economy doesn't collapse but also doesn't grow significantly. This happened to the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 1980s when it got stuck in a rut of low growth and declining living standards. Russia is already showing signs of this. Non-military sector investments like technology and healthcare have dropped 4% compared to the previous year. The economy requires new factories, research labs, and startups to grow and compete, just like a car needs fuel to run. You can keep going for a while, but you won't get very far. Russia is stuck in old industries like oil and mining, while the rest of the world is moving forward. Stagnation would mean a slow decline for Russia.
Russia, at the turn of the century, 25 years ago, was already 50 years behind, and now it's a whole century behind. Russia was mainly built at the expense of natural resources and the science that remained from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. This allowed the country to exist throughout all the years of Putin's rule, from the late 90s until the beginning, I would say, of the war in Ukraine. Russia is standing still while Europe, Asia, America, especially Asia, by the way, and America are rapidly moving forward into other technologies, into a more productive future. The ruling class of Russia can continue to live a wealthy life only if they turn the country's population into slaves, many working, getting little for it. But slaves are poor producers. That's why the world abandoned slavery. And Russia is moving in that direction by leaps and bounds. The country has actually always had two ways of dealing with its people. One was called corvée, the other was called quittron.
Russia could turn things around with reform, but it's a hard road. The economy has stalled because the government controls too much, from oil companies to banks, and a small group of elites likes it that way. Loosening this grip could help. For instance, providing tax relief or reducing inspections for small businesses would enable their growth. This would create jobs for young Russians who might otherwise leave. In the early 2000s, Russia tried something similar, and tax breaks for tech startups helped companies like Yandex take off, providing jobs for thousands of people. These small steps showed what is possible when the government loosens its grip. Today, Russia could invest in new industries like green energy or advanced manufacturing to be less dependent on oil. Solar power plants or battery factories could create jobs and retain talented engineers in the local area. Boosting school funding would help by preparing kids for tech or science jobs rather than an oil-focused system. But there's a catch. Reforms threaten the elites who run state-owned companies and profit from shady deals. In 2016, insiders such as oil bosses and government officials had little incentive to make changes. The attempt to privatize some state-owned companies stalled because powerful groups fought to keep control. The war in Ukraine also sustains Russia's confrontation with the West, deterring foreign investors who could provide capital and technology. Sanctions will likely persist after the war ends. Economic pain may force small changes if prices continue to rise and people remain angry. The Kremlin may attempt tax breaks or training initiatives to ease tensions, which could begin to address the issues. Russia's leaders must choose: keep the failing old system or risk trying something new. History suggests they'll resist, but pressure from below might crack the door open. Ultimately, it's evident that the Russian economy is struggling, despite the government's attempts to convince otherwise. The 4% growth in 2024 was an illusion, built on military spending that's actually draining the country. The crisis is more than just numbers, it's a lesson. Russia shows how quickly a giant can collapse when it bets everything on one thing, like oil, or gets involved in conflicts it can't afford, like in Ukraine. This is a warning to every country: build a strong and diverse economy or risk collapsing under pressure. The people of Russia are paying the price, and the world is feeling the consequences. And regardless of whether Russia collapses further or manages to recover, its history will shape the future. From global trade to superpower rivalry, the nation is on the brink, and the next events could be transformative. Thank you for watching.
In other words, Russia's resources, its financial resources, are close to being exhausted. Oil, gas, and military equipment are not bringing in as much as they used to. The situation can be changed by giving businesses freedom, but the corrupt system and centralized management don't allow anything to change. Russia's future is either hungry riots if oil and gas aren't sold, or more likely, the country turning into a kind of military camp where the population is forced to work and is paid with food ration cards. And the punishment for any offense is execution by shooting. And the eternal Putin is always showing them the way forward or backward, anywhere at all. Putin will be made by the Chinese, of course, from the very best American and Israeli materials. Well, I said I loved it. Of course, I exaggerated a little bit. But already several employees, hosts on the programs, are telling the truth. You just don't understand this. It's hard to even imagine this a year or two ago, really. A year ago, it was impossible for anyone to open their mouth and say something that actually happened. Nothing like that was happening there. I mean, it's a complete turnaround. This is the source of malicious, vile propaganda.
All right, let's look at the number of those who strongly approve. These aren't just Republicans who like Donald Trump. These are Republicans who adore Donald Trump. His approval rating is skyrocketing. In July 2017, the strongly approve rate
Was 53%. That's pretty good, but look, where is it now? 63% of Republicans strongly approve of the job Donald Trump is doing about 5 months after the start of his presidency. Republicans love Donald Trump just like Americans love Disneyland. So, in the end, 63% is a huge, huge base. And of course, that's just part of the Republican base, which overall about 90% approve of him, including those who just approve.
The discussion is that 4 years ago, 54% of those who vote Republican said, we really like Trump. But it's not exactly those words. It's more like, we strongly support Trump. Believe me, they did. And 63%, believe me, gentlemen, these are astonishing numbers. Not just support, but I really like what he's doing. 63%, that's incredible.
I mean, any politician would like this. Well, I mean, every politician would want to see this number here, especially for it to be growing. How about compared to other presidents and Republicans?
Yes, this is a historic event. This is a historic event. That's what we're talking about. Why don't we look back? We have all the Republican presidents from the past 35 to 37 years.
Here, look at Papa Bush, Bush's son, and Trump, 45 and 47.
Oh.
What are we talking about? Republicans? Who strongly approves? After 5 months, look at this. George Bush Sr., Bush 41, 46%, Bush 43, 59. You see Trump in his first term at 53, but look at this, 63%. He surpasses all the other Republicans on the board here, and I even look back to the Reagan era.
Here, Donald Trump surpasses Ronald Reagan in terms of strong support after 5 months.
Was supported after the assassination attempt on
him. So the point is that Donald
Trump is going down in history with the Republican base. He is more loved by this Republican base than any Republican president in 5 months of leadership. This is a historic event.
I don't care if the story is told with sour faces or with enthusiasm. What matters to me is that the reality and the facts are not hidden from me.
While Trump is breaking popularity records that even Reagan couldn't reach, the Democratic Party is literally falling apart from within. Prominent Democrats are leaving the ship faster than you can say, "Make America Great Again." And I have a complete list of those who are leaving this sinking ship. What you're about to see will surely amaze you. We're talking about historic numbers, which they themselves called sobering news for their shrinking Democratic audience. Trump achieved something that no Republican president has done in modern history, and that's just 5 months after taking office. That will definitely lift your spirits.
By the way, do you know what a magic wand is? It's when Trump supports a candidate for Congress, governor, or any other position and points at them with a wand, a finger, it doesn't matter, even with his nose.
Trump had a 96% win rate for all the candidates he supported. 96%. In 2022, that win rate was 95%. The Republican base doesn't just support Trump. They're in love with him, as Harry Enton said, just like Americans love us.
Disneyland, right?
And as we've seen with most members of the House of Representatives and Republicans who voted to impeach Trump during his first term. Even when Trump supports challengers against incumbent Republicans in the primaries, in most cases the challenger always wins. So Trump has political power, the likes of which we've literally never seen in the Republican Party. Right now, while Trump is setting records, things are a real nightmare for the Democrats.
Our system evolved into a two-party one. There are a few smaller parties, but they don't play a significant role. Well, maybe they can take away some votes from one candidate or another, and if the difference is very small, they might have some influence. When the Whig Party broke up, the Republican Party emerged. Opponents of slavery, opponents of segregation, opponents of centralization. In other words, those who wanted freedom and a free market. Instead of Whigs and Democrats, it became Democrats and Republicans. Maybe it's time for the Democrats to give way to new ideas and new people.
The Democratic Party is experiencing something like a mass exodus that would make the Titanic jealous. Among the growing list of Democratic Party leaders who have officially left the party, you have Karen Jean-Pierre, right? The former White House press secretary for diversity, equity, and inclusion under Biden left her position. Her latest book, titled Independent, will likely remain unread. You have Kentucky State Senator Robin Webb. She left a few weeks ago. We made a video about it. Randy Weingarten, right? The president of the American Federation of Teachers left the Democratic National Committee. The same Lee Saunders, president of the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, also left the Democratic National Committee. The leading Democrat of Florida, Senate Minority Leader Jason Pizzo, their main Democrat in the state. He just switched. Now he's an independent. New York City Mayor Eric Adams, of course, has officially left the Democratic Party. Now he's an independent. Actually, New York Democrats have just accepted a full-fledged communist. But that's nothing. That's just the leadership. Here's a huge story that the mainstream media won't tell you about. More than 1 million voters have switched from Democrats to Republicans in the past year in 43 states. 1 million voters left the Democratic Party and became Republicans in the past year. These people aren't just politicians, they're ordinary Americans. Voters are saying enough is enough.
In 43 states, Democrats are switching in large numbers. They're not just leaving the Democratic Party, they're changing their party affiliation from Democratic to Republican. And what about in fully Democratic states? What's happening there? Republicans didn't have any chance there before, but what about now?
Here's a real nightmare scenario for the Democrats. Their largest states, California, Illinois, New York, are all shrinking while the Republican ones,
States are literally
are all growing in population. Democratic states are shrinking while the population of Republican states is growing rapidly. If current trends continue, by 2030, Democratic states could lose at least 12 seats in the House of Representatives and electoral votes to Republican states.
And now add to that the fact that in 2026, before the elections, another census will be conducted. That is the issue of population, the population count. I don't know what it's called in Russian. The counting and analysis of the population of the United States of America. If the Republicans can restore one question in this document, namely, are you legal, Vasya, or are you not legal? Then it will turn out that American citizens vote differently than illegals. And the Republicans will get many, many more seats in Congress, yes, and possibly in the Senate as well, by the way. By the way, listen to some interesting statistics.
Look at what's happening. Recruitment into the Army is just incredible right now because young people are so inspired by the opportunity to serve under leaders who honor strength and don't apologize for it. Conservative policies work for border security. By the way, we now know about June. Did you hear? The border, illegal border crossings, 0-0. May and June, 2 months in a row, 0 illegal border crossings. Conservative policies work for our border. Economic growth. Americans are seeing the results. The culture war is changing. The University of Pennsylvania is forced to issue an official apology to all the swimmers who lost to the transgender swimmer Leah Thomas They are stripping Leah Thomas of all her medals and offering a formal apology to every athlete who had to compete against Leah Thomas. And you will see this all over the country, in every college that shamefully took part in this fiasco.
The discussion is about how universities in America allowed men to compete with women in women's sports during Biden's time. And in many sports, men naturally won, simply because that's how nature made men. There are different hormones, different speed, different muscles, and so on. The caption, the United States of America has stopped supplying weapons to Ukraine.
Okay, good. Of course, a few announcements here at the top. All right, great. Of course, a few announcements at the beginning. I'm Temi Brias, a representative. Thanks for coming. This week, the Trump administration and the State Department achieved significant milestones, promoting peace, strengthening United States partnerships, and redirecting foreign aid to better serve American interests. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue Partnership between the United States, India, Japan, and Australia held a meeting of foreign ministers here in Washington, District of Columbia, right at the State Department. These officials, representing 35% of the world's combined gross domestic product, advanced an ambitious agenda to strengthen collective security and economic resilience. The Quad countries agreed to expand cooperation in maritime law enforcement in the Indo-Pacific region, strengthening their shared commitment to upholding international law and freedom of navigation. They also launched an initiative on critical minerals. The Quad is a significant effort to diversify and secure global supply chains in strategic sectors, ensuring the resilience of our economies against pressure.
I paused this video to emphasize that the minerals the United States supposedly planned to mine in Ukraine will now be mined in Africa. For example, Congo stopped the war with Rwanda because the Americans said, if you stop the war that lasted 30 years, 6 million people died, stop the war, we'll come. We'll start developing this region. They both immediately rushed to the White House and signed all the necessary papers. So there, unlike Ukraine and Russia, they decided to stop the wars in order to become part of Trump's world, Trump's global system.
I can also announce the completion of a major reform in the field of foreign aid. Secretary Rubio noted that the United States Agency for International Development will no longer carry out foreign aid programs. The State Department will take the lead in administering foreign aid programs, with a mission that directly advances our national interests, accountability, strategy, and effectiveness.
According to a White House representative, the Trump administration has suspended some arms shipments to Ukraine, as reported by our colleagues. What role did the State Department play in making this decision to suspend arms shipments? And are you concerned about the advantage this gives the Russians?
Well, traditionally, of course, our primary focus is diplomacy. We don't decide on arms shipments or arms control. Green War, we have the Ministry of Defense, and I would refer you to them when it comes to that kind of decision. Simultaneously, there are a few points I can share regarding this matter. It remains, as you can imagine, and it's worth repeating, President Trump's priority to end the war between Russia and Ukraine through a lasting negotiated settlement, starting with an immediate ceasefire. And of course, it's worth repeating that for more information about this weapons situation, please contact the Department of Defense. Anna Kelly, the official White House spokesperson, also noted, this decision was made to put America's interests first. After a review by the Department of Defense of our military support and assistance to other countries around the world. The strength of the United States Armed Forces remains beyond any doubt. Just ask Iran. Also from Elbridge Colby's statement from the 2nd, which was yesterday at the Department of Defense, where the Department of Defense, quotes, continues to provide the president with powerful options to continue military assistance to Ukraine. At the same time, the department is carefully studying and adapting its approach to achieving this goal while maintaining the combat readiness of the United States Armed Forces for the administration's defense priorities.
May I quickly ask about GHFM? The State Department announced last week that you approved $30 million. Has any of that money already been allocated, and if so, how much?
It was fully approved. It has not been allocated. There is a process, as you might imagine, in the building regarding the allocation of any funds. And when that happens, I'll let you know first.
So the question remains unanswered. Trump wants something from Ukraine and is showing that we need to think faster. But what does he want? Well, it's like a puzzle. Trump wants the shooting to stop. Trump doesn't care at all. The border will go south of Donbass or north, I don't know, somewhere from Kharkiv. He believes that the people of the region themselves should deal with regional problems. If you can hold it, hold it. If you can't hold it, don't. Build relationships with your neighbors and organize blocks. I understand that Ukrainians don't think that way. But let me ask you, gentlemen, is it important to you that Congo and Rwanda return to the borders they had 30 years ago? Or do you absolutely not care how far from the river the Rwandan fighting squads will be stationed? And are you also ready to send money, weapons, and your children to Congo so that pregnant women are not killed in Rwanda? As soon as you honestly answer this question, this specific question, not something like, are they a nuclear state? Because it doesn't matter who they are or what they are. As soon as you honestly admit to yourself that you don't care about Lebanon, Syria, Guatemala, Bangladesh, Chad, and other Ugandas, you'll understand that this is exactly how most Americans feel about Russia, Poland, the Czech Republic, Belarus, and Ukraine. And now, finally, Israel.
That Iran chose to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency at a time that Iran decided to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency at a time when it has the opportunity to change course and choose the path of peace and prosperity. Iran must fully cooperate without further delays. Before, just like turning off your phone, this should continue without delays. Before the successful United States military operation, Iran was accumulating a growing stockpile of highly enriched uranium, for which there was no convincing peaceful purpose, and it was the only country producing highly enriched uranium up to 60%. Without nuclear weapons, Iran must fully comply with its safeguards agreement required under DINYAR. This includes providing the International Atomic Energy Agency with the information needed to clarify and resolve long-standing questions about undeclared nuclear material in Iran, as well as granting unrestricted access to the newly declared enrichment facility. We look forward to further detailed reports from the International Atomic Energy Agency on this matter. It is worth repeating, since we have achieved tremendous success thanks to the leadership of Donald Trump, Iran cannot and will not have nuclear weapons. The President has said this more than once. The Secretary of State has said this repeatedly, and we have repeated it from this podium. And at this stage, of course, it is again unacceptable here that Iran chooses to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Yes, Daphna, to answer your question.
Thank you. Does this latest ceasefire proposal for Gaza, which Trump said Israel agreed to, include a provision for the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza?
What am I going to do? The President had it. There was a message about it since last night, and I will read it for you to record it. From President Donald Trump. My representatives had a long and productive meeting with the Israelis today about Gaza. Israel has agreed to the necessary conditions for a 60-day ceasefire, during which we will work with all countries to end the war. The Qataris and Egyptians, who have worked very hard to help achieve peace, will present this final proposal. I hope that for the good of the Middle East, Hamas will accept this proposal, because there won't be a better one, only a worse one. Thank you for your attention to this matter.
Well, it's simple and clear. We, the United States, are warning you We are drawing the line, we are warning again, but there comes a point when even our patience runs out. And then what we warned you about, what we offered you before will be much better than what we will offer you later. You'd better take it now. Our offer will get worse and worse. Also, I think you will be interested in this dialogue about American aid to countries, organizations, and individuals all over the planet. Listen.
I would like to ask you about the cessation of activities, about becoming part of the State Department in a completely different way. According to a highly respected British medical journal, he was responsible for saving 90 million lives over 2 decades. American aid is responsible for that. Andrea, let me correct you here. United States Agency for International Development was an element of the United States government, distributing taxpayers' funds around the world for economic development, humanitarian aid, and various projects. It was the United States government. And when it comes to aid, it's not the department, but the nature of what the government under different administrations has approved. Let's keep that in mind. Yes, please, but I really want this. It's worth correcting. And former President Bush, who was responsible with a bipartisan majority in Congress for many years, suggested that saving 25 million lives thanks to antiretroviral drugs for both human immunodeficiency virus, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, and tuberculosis. This is what the employees, because he sent this to the employees in a video and said that you should be proud of this and may God bless you all for what you have done. So I just wanted to ask you, how will this be recreated?
Because
the secretaries who write about it describe it as wasteful and not fulfilling the goals of the United States in broad terms. And this contradicts what Republicans and Democrats have been saying in Congress for many years. Well, yes, it inevitably became something bigger than originally intended. Obviously, there were some really good options and the assistance that was provided, and that assistance was preserved, but what we found turned out to be unacceptable. We have discussed this openly since the beginning of the Trump administration and the State Department under the leadership of
Secretary Rubio.
What is this? And I think I have to repeat, this is the past, things that happened in the past. Definitely, the assistance that was provided and was useful was maintained, and other assistance that did not match America's priorities or what the Trump administration and Secretary Rubio considered appropriate was not. In this regard, actions were taken. Also, as I have repeatedly said, even though the mechanism changed, it was because it grew. It became unable to function. So even an audit was something that was easy to do, but permission to allow the audit was denied. At the beginning of this administration, there was a sense that it was some kind of independent organization, something not connected to the United States government. All of this is absurd. This led, yes, to decisive actions to review, reconsider, and audit this organization. We did it. A significant portion of the aid remained, and a significant portion was suspended or completely stopped. This fit well with the need to reform the government as a whole through the president's decree about it and to save money. I'll repeat it once again. Samantha Power, the last United States director under the previous administration at the end of 2024, complained in her public statements that when she started, only 7% of the aid money allocated to various projects and groups actually reached its intended destination. That's because of bureaucracy and the large number of contractors. And she was proud that she raised that figure to 10%. We can all agree that this is unacceptable. And even if the amount of funding is reduced, it doesn't mean that services will be cut.
What you just heard, honestly, it shocks me. Congress allocates money for a project in Afghanistan or in Mali. The project receives 10% of the money allocated by the taxpayers of the United States of America. We thought they were stealing half, but we were wrong. As Tammy said, the last director boasted that before her, 93% of all allocated funds were stolen, and she reduced the theft to 90%. In my opinion, that's a remarkable achievement. They should just put up a big cement monument to this director, unless, of course, she hasn't already been taken out for knowing too much. The girl knew a lot. And finally, gentlemen, below you'll find a link to my book for free, Capitalism 101, a collection of incredible stories about the meaning of our lives. And whoever downloads it completely for free will get a prize. Every day you will receive a 10-minute video every morning with fascinating stories, questions, puzzles, and stories about how to make your life happy, how to make your life better. That's free too. Why is it free? Because I'm very cheerful and handsome. Well, that's what I think. Goodbye.